There's a specific kind of person who always notices when someone else is struggling before anyone else does. The one who remembers your birthday without being reminded, who checks in after your bad day, who somehow always ends up giving more than they receive. If that sounds like you, or someone you know, you've probably also felt the quiet exhaustion that comes with it. The sense of being poured out, again and again, while rarely being filled back up. This video is about why that happens, what it actually says about your psychology, and most importantly, how to stop it from costing you your own well-being. Because being deeply empathetic isn't a weakness, but giving without limits, almost always, is. Psychologists describe high empathy as the ability to feel what others feel almost as intensely as they feel it themselves. It's an incredible trait. It builds trust, deepens relationships, and makes you the person others turn to in a crisis. But there's a lesser-known side effect. Highly empathetic people often struggle to distinguish between someone else's emotional need and their own responsibility to fix it. When a friend is upset, an empath doesn't just sympathize. Their nervous system reacts almost as if the problem is happening to them directly. This is why empathetic people frequently find themselves solving problems that were never theirs to solve, staying in draining situations far longer than they should, or feeling guilty for setting the most basic boundaries. The trait itself isn't the problem. The problem is that most empathetic people were never taught where their emotional responsibility ends and someone else's begins. And without that boundary, empathy quietly turns from a strength into a form of self-erasure. Here's something most people don't realize. Chronic overgiving is rarely just a personality trait. It's often a learned survival strategy. Many highly empathetic adults grew up in environments where love or approval felt conditional, where being good, helpful, or easy to deal with was the safest way to avoid conflict or gain attention. As children, they learned an unconscious rule: my needs are a burden, but meeting other people's needs keeps me safe and valued. That rule doesn't disappear in adulthood. It just changes shape. It shows up as saying yes when you mean no, apologizing for things that aren't your fault, or feeling anxious the moment you consider prioritizing yourself. This is why overgivers often don't even recognize they're doing it. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like who they are. But understanding that this pattern was learned, not innate, is the first step to realizing it can also be unlearned. There's a painful pattern that highly empathetic people notice eventually. The more they give, the more certain relationships seem to take. This isn't a coincidence. People who are used to taking, consciously or not, are often drawn to those who give without asking for anything in return, because it requires no effort on their part. Meanwhile, emotionally healthy, reciprocal people are sometimes overlooked simply because they don't create the same urgency. A relationship built on ease doesn't feel as dramatic as one where you're constantly needed. Over time, this creates a frustrating cycle. The overgiver ends up surrounded by people who rely on them heavily, while feeling like true reciprocity. Someone checking in on them, remembering their needs, is rare. This isn't because they're unlovable. It's because they've unintentionally trained the people around them to expect one-sided effort, simply by never asking for anything different. Let's go through 6 specific signs that separate genuine kindness from unhealthy overgiving. 1. You feel guilty resting while others are struggling, even when their struggle has nothing to do with you. 2. You apologize reflexively, even for things that were clearly not your fault, just to keep the peace. 3. You know everyone else's problems in detail, but rarely share your own, because you've learned to be the listener, not the one who's heard. 4. You feel responsible for other people's emotions, believing that if someone is upset, it's partly your job to fix it. 5. You struggle to receive help or compliments, deflecting them almost automatically, because giving feels safe, but receiving feels exposed. 6. You stay in draining relationships far longer than you should, because leaving feels selfish, even when staying is quietly costing you your peace. If several of these describe you, this isn't a character flaw. It's a pattern that developed for a reason, and like any pattern, it can be rebuilt once you can actually see it clearly. The goal was never to become less caring. The goal is to make sure your empathy includes you too. First, practice the pause. Before automatically saying yes to a request, give yourself permission to say, "Let me think about it." Even for 5 minutes. That short gap breaks the automatic. Guilt responds and gives you room to check whether you actually want to help or whether you're just avoiding discomfort. Second, notice the relationships where you're the only one initiating check-ins, remembering details, or offering support. You don't need to end these relationships immediately, but you do need to start being honest with yourself about which ones are mutual and which ones aren't. Third, let people see your struggles sometimes. This feels deeply uncomfortable for overgivers, but it's often what deepens a relationship the most. People bond over shared vulnerability, not one-sided support. And hiding your own needs doesn't protect the relationship. It just keeps it unbalanced. And finally, understand that boundaries are not the opposite of empathy there. What make empathy sustainable? A boundary isn't a wall that keeps people out. It's a filter that lets you keep giving, without giving yourself away completely. If you've spent years being the one who holds everyone else together, understand this. Your empathy was never the problem. The absence of boundaries around it was. You can be deeply caring and still protect your own peace. Those two things were never meant to be opposites. If this described you, let me know in the comments which sign hit closest to home, and subscribe. Because next week, we're breaking down the psychology of why some people struggle to ask for help, even when they desperately need it.